Hi, everyone, and welcome to Decentralized. We're here with one of my oldest friends, Jonathan Mayo-Buttry, who is from 3D Robotics and has also done some amazing motion design work for projects that I've been involved in the past, and just wanted to have him on and talk a little bit about what he's doing. So how are you doing, John?
Good. Thanks, Tony. Thanks, James. Thanks, guys, for having me on. I'm doing great. I'm here at 3D Robotics in Austin, Texas. Another awesome day. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Absolutely. The first question I wanted to ask is, what exactly does a motion designer do? And we'll kind of go into that before we go into the 3D robotics stuff.
Definitely. At its core, you are somebody who has to communicate. So you have to know what the tools are that you have to speak with. You have to know who you're talking to and the appropriate way to talk to them. And I think most motion designers start off as either graphic designers or photographers or doing print work. And if you kind of are wired for that, like being a constant sponge and soaking up data, never being satisfied and always looking for more, all those things kind of come together to become motion design, which is essentially graphic design but animated to tell stories. So you use tools like you need to know your traditional graphic design in terms of how colors work, how type works, how they interact, how photography works, but also how video works, how 3D works and interacts with that, and everything in between. So anything that moves on a screen, from 3D animation to video to special effects to animated type, the more you can use those things and be skilled in those things, the better motion designer you'll be. For instance, the work that I've done with Tony on Augur and BitPay was clear that it requires you to look at that tool set and say what would be appropriate to talk to this audience. So coming up with like an animated infographic to explain something that's very complex and keep it entertaining and fast-paced and digestible kind of gets over the hurdle of explaining to somebody, what these high-level concepts are and having them drop off quickly. So sometimes projects call for video. I do a lot of video and post-production here at 3DR, and other times projects call for full 3D animation, and I am obsessed with all things that fall into anywhere between those things.
So tell us a little bit about the history of this field and this art, especially maybe during your involvement in it. How has it changed, and how has technology kind of helped propel it along, this particular kind of work?
Yeah, technology has been a huge part of it. The history kind of goes back to things like film titles. There's a guy named Saul Bass who did some really interesting film titles, kind of when you think of like the old James Bond type stuff, like the old Psycho movie, things like that, where you have this concept now of graphic treatments for film that kind of tee up the story or have some foreshadowing, and using shapes and imagery to kind of kick off a story. That was kind of the beginning of mixing it, and I mean it totally flows over into animation. So you could also make an argument that like the stuff Walt Disney did, Steamboat Willie, that has parts of it. But really, when computers kind of came along and allowed people to animate and create and composite things, that's when you kind of hit that critical curve where it's more accessible to people, and people start using these tools, and they grow in step, and they become easier and easier to use. Now, that being said, there's a lot of things you can do in terms of kind of stock, out of the box, like templates and software stuff that looks really good, but for any kind of approach, I mean, you kind of think of it as like storytelling. So if I'm going to tell a specific story about something that's like customized to a specific audience, you can't use anything like canned. You can't use presets or plugins. Like, everything has to be informed. And when you look at all the projects that I do, I take a lot of pride in trying to put as much thought and into them as possible, and as much custom treatments to where everything is informed and intentional to explain something or weave you along or tee something up or whatever the story calls for. So computers have made that a lot easier and more accessible, but it's really the core of anything advertising or marketing related, is like the messaging and the tone, and those are types of things that as much as people try, you can never create boxed solutions for those. So there's a lot of care that goes into it, and to me that's the fun stuff.
It's really interesting. It seems like motion design is kind of a medium for our times, and that it is, like you say, it seems to be very customizable. it's not something where you can be very lazy at it. It seems like you really do have to put a lot of care into it, as you say, and it's about yeah, it's kind of creating a much more involving experience, and that seems to be something people demand.
Definitely.
What? Yeah.
And I think you have people that are wired for that. Like I'm obsessed with everything around me at all times. Like if I'm indoors, I'll look at pieces of hardware and like the industrial design behind that, or I'll look at like a wall and be like, cool, what did they use, metal studs or aluminum studs, and how much space is between them and why, and structural integrity. And if I go outside, I'm like marveling at the fact that like, oh, this tree's been here for hundreds of years and seen more than I have, or cool, look at the sun. It's a giant flaming exploding ball that has its own gravitational pull that's hurling us around it, and then we get the moon in our gravitational pull, and it just all exists. And like I'm just constantly fascinated by everything around me, and that kind of lends your point of view to motion design. Like if you combine graphic design, photography, video, post-production, and all roll that into a tool set that can be used for storytelling, like, dude, I'm never going to get bored in my entire life. Like, that's a tool set that will constantly grow and that will constantly stimulate somebody who is obsessed with everything around them and the mechanics of how it works and wants to soak that up and use it as tools to communicate things that I'd like to communicate or stories I'd like to tell. I think there's kind of like two parties. You have people that are like, yeah, I have this thought and this voice, and I want to like write my own scripts and get my own movies and stuff like that out there. And I think that's like a lot of where you have a lot of directors kind of going that route. But for me, I'm just personally more interested knowing that when you're marketing a product, you kind of have a built-in audience. You have people that are going to be interested in this thing, and you know that if you make content, you are going to be directly interfacing with them. So to me, it's like the difference between like going out on a street corner and singing a song to whoever's listening, to like showing up to a room that's just packed with people, knowing that you have a message to deliver, and that's more exciting to me personally. Yeah, I think it's neat.
And I think in regards to what you just said, it involves the videos that you did for Augur and for BitPay. Specifically the Augur video, which has been very successful lately. Very successful. I can't say how good of a job you did on that. And I'm curious about when you mentioned about box solutions and how they don't work. I think that's actually the case in a lot of things, being involved in marketing, and that there's a habit, because it's easier to just go with that and say, okay, I'm going to do this. This is the way it's done. And let's just do that, and it'll work. And usually it doesn't. And it's something where, when did you learn that? Was that something you knew from the beginning, or was that something that you kind of saw as you studied other pieces of work, other advertisements, other videos, other just content in general?
I think you learn those principles early on, and a lot of those principles are present in graphic design. Like my history is in everything from print collateral to direct mail, where it's like, cool, you have one image and one headline and then some body copy, and you need to make your point in that. And so you kind of get like, how much can you squeeze out of that? But when you put that on a timeline, and now you have linear storytelling, like, you can infinitely customize that to say exactly what you want to say in a more crafted way. Like for the Augur video, and this is kind of the specialty that I've carved out in the last few years, has been working with companies in different parts of the tech space, from drones to the computer-aided sniper rifles to decentralized, BitPay and Augur, where it's my job to first be a good listener, and I have to understand the product good enough to tell the story. Like, if I know how to explain Augur good enough to create a story that can explain it to other people and keep it entertaining, but any level beyond that, if you ask me like what's going on under the hood of Augur, I couldn't explain it all. So it's like walking this fine line as a marketer, saying I need to know what I'm talking about good enough to inform other people, but my job isn't to be an expert on the mechanics of it. It's to tell that story and bring people along. So for the Augur video, it was super interesting, the fact that Tony had this connection in Shooter Jennings, which is like completely unconventional for a voiceover in terms of like a country singer explaining a decentralized tech concept. But to me, like, that's what makes it exciting, because if you hear that, it's not going to be like, oh, it's like every other, video on Kickstarter where it's filmed on white, because that's how Apple does it. And it's like really nice coaxing voice explains a concept and makes it seem attainable. Like, no, dude, we're going to get Shooter Jennings, who sings country music, and like have him sit back as if you were enjoying a beer on a porch and explain to you what Augur is. And we're going to have these really like graphics that kind of carry you through it, and it's going to be pretty informative to where like when you finish it, you feel like you just had like a nice glass of iced tea with Shooter Jennings, and now you know about decentralized marketplace prediction. Like that's pretty unique. And to that statement, I mean, there's a lot of noise out there from a lot of companies that are selling vaporware or concepts or just trying to be like, okay, I'm sure you guys see it all the time in the decentralization world where like decentralization exists, the blockchain exists, you have all these people wanting to create companies based off of that, but they just want to kind of take advantage for what it is and slap whatever they do into that mold because it's a new like hot word or a new market or a new audience for them. But it's, to me, having the companies that are trying to do something thoughtful or meaningful or both are the ones that have more of a story to tell. So like those canned solutions, and I think like it varies from industry to industry. Like for web, for instance, if you're going to launch a website, you don't go learn CSS, you go find a WordPress template, and then you hit a few buttons and you can build a database and host it. For web, that kind of works because, not in all instances, but because like your content is king, and you don't need to like reinvent some Flash site where like the cursor is like a ripple of water to try and tell your story. You can do that through text and images. But for video, it's a little more involved than that because it's taking place on a timeline, and you kind of have to do something that cuts through the noise. And I think that's where marketing, like we know what kind of marketing is templated and works now. But to do effective marketing and good marketing, you have to be kind of self-aware of that and a little more clever to cut through the noise.
It's a really interesting story, especially based on kind of what we were talking about prior to the call, which is you're kind of really telling me you don't really have too much of a background in decentralized technology. Can you tell us a little bit about that and maybe what your background kind of is in the companies you work with? Because you've worked with some really cool companies, as your sniper rifle comment hinted at.
Yeah. So I mean, in terms of decentralized companies or companies that work off the blockchain, I mean, I always think Tony's story is pretty amazing. How he kind of got paired up with the right community, and I mean, I could talk about so many parts of this for so long. But I guess the whole idea, which covers like not only to me like how Tony broke into that, but also how I got into what I'm doing, is like you're born into this environment that you grew up in, and either you accept like, cool, that's the size of the world, and I haven't seen much or traveled much, and maybe I'll do X, Y, or Z for a living because that's like what the people I know do, or that's what their parents do. But like for somebody like Tony, who's like a sponge about everything in the world, like he's not going to settle for that, and he knows there's more out there, and he's going to find it. And similarly, like I was fascinated by the world around me, and I love learning about new things and taking on challenges, even if they're things that I don't know anything about, because my universe is going to be bigger by doing that. So when Tony first contacted me to do, originally the BitPay video was the first thing we worked on. I don't know anything about Bitcoin, but immediately I'm like, great, that's super exciting, and my skill set lends itself towards telling stories that I'm not an expert in because I enjoy becoming expert enough to tell those stories. So I start reading about Bitcoin, I start reading about mining and blockchain and the whole history, and I have questions like, okay, it's completely transparent but also completely anonymous. Those things seem to contradict each other. How does that work? And then Tony's like, glad you asked, and he has some amazing explanation. I'm like, man, you should be like recording this on audiobooks and selling it because it's super informative. But so having somebody like Tony who can explain all those things helps a lot. And then once I feel like I have enough to tell the story and I understand who they're talking to, I can craft that message. In terms of other interesting companies that I've done stuff for and how I ended up at 3DR, in probably for about 10 years or so, I worked in agencies or marketing companies in one capacity or another. And when you're in those kinds of worlds, oops, hold on. Sorry, my tab exited. Am I still on? Okay, cool. Sorry about that. You're basically handed accounts. Like one of the agencies I worked at in Atlanta specialized in, when I started there, they specialized in sports. So they had like the Atlanta Braves and the Thrashers and the Hawks, and I know how basketball and baseball generally work. If you're going to be advertising, you need to be an expert. So you learn about, players and what makes them unique and their connections to people. And I worked with a guy who, at that agency, who ended up taking a job at a gun company that makes, they called them precision-guided firearms, which was essentially a computer on a rifle, and the computer was pretty powerful, had like a Wi-Fi server in it, and it would calculate ballistic solutions to where you could essentially tap a button and the bullet would go up to 1,200 yards, pretty much exactly where you wanted it to go. So if you've never shot a gun before, you can shoot better than the world's best sniper. That was kind of their marketing claim, and they were able to back it up in a lot of interesting ways. I wasn't really a gun guy, and I didn't know much about guns, but I was confident enough in marketing and storytelling to where I would move halfway across the country and immerse myself in that world, and it was pretty amazing. A lot of the things that you would think about gun-wielding Texans aren't really true. They're pretty open-minded, amazing people. And so doing things like that, I'm much more interested in expanding my own comfort zones and telling stories for other people than just saying, like, here's my values, here's what I'm committed to, here's my world, and I'm just going to scream about, what I believe in and what I stand for until I die. I would rather be this, like, pliable piece of clay that has this amazing experience participating in, all these parts of the world that I think are really interesting and amazing. So I did a lot for that gun company, and when 3D Robotics came along, some of the people from that company had moved to 3D Robotics, and they knew my work, and they brought me on board to help out with the launch of their main project, which is a smart drone, which is out now. And a little backstory, I guess, on 3D Robotics. Chris Anderson, who was the editor of Wired, was very into drones and knew that there would be things going on in that space, and he kind of found through the internet and message boards and kind of DIY back channels, that there was somebody named Jordi in Mexico who was designing his own flight code, and they basically partnered up and started 3DR as just two people, and they built it into a company of almost 400 people, partnering with some people who came from bigger drone companies, and they're basically taking the angle that software is the key to drones and unlocking their potential, and that being open source and transparent and participating directly with the users and offering a great customer experience and user experience are things that people care about. And the interesting thing for me is I had flown drones before to capture footage and on video shoots and things like that, but basically they're taking the pilot element out of it. You no longer need to know how to pilot a drone in order to get amazing footage. And similar to the way you don't need to know how to use a complicated computer to run a smartphone, it's very app-driven. So you can get these shots that the best drone pilots in the world couldn't get by pushing one button on your phone. And they're doing that all through computers, and it's all open source. So they have a lot of open source implications that I think are really neat. Some of which are, I'm trying to think of the formal name. It's basically a program where you can develop products, accessories for the drone, bring them to market, and we will help you with the production of them and marketing of them, but you'll own the IP, things like that. Also being open source, having like a 30-pin, whatever, bay on the belly of the drone that you can essentially tap into and make your own products or run your own software, hardware, ideas on. I think that's really, really awesome.
Absolutely. And sorry for a second there. Of course, I'm having connection problems now too. With all that said, and thank you very much for the compliments as well. Is there any information you can get to people that are involved in that specifically? At the end, we'll let you kind of plug the other projects. But let's say someone's interested in a project involving 3D robotics and wants to access the code. They want to access information of how to get started. Where would you recommend going?
Um, their website, I think, has some of the information that you would need to do that. But I mean, they're a pretty transparent company. Like if you write on their Facebook wall, somebody in our office that's connected to all of us will see it. And if you are somebody that's currently using drones to do amazing things, we've probably already contacted you and offered to do some kind of partnership or give you products to try out. I mean, it's very, very connected. And for instance, like when we did our big launch at a trade show, we had people just hanging out at the booth that were interested, and because they were interested, they now work for us. So I mean, it's one of the most connected and transparent companies I've seen in terms of if you're passionate and good at what you do, about what you do, it's very easy for you to get plugged in and for us to know who you are, and very connected environment, which is exciting. In terms of building products, it's a pretty small circle, so most people who are building things for drones are using what's called Pixhawk, which is our flight controller. Like 90% of the drones you see that are one-offs, like that Lily drone that was super popular because of their Kickstarter, and almost any other drone that you see that's not some big commercial brand is using our flight controller. They're using our software. They're using our hardware to run their flight code. So we are insanely plugged into that environment in terms of being a part of it, and anybody who's building on drones is already probably using our hardware and software and knows who we are and how to get a hold of us.
It sounds like an amazing company, and you were actually just showing us around through your camera, your webcam, actually what the office looks like, and everyone working and playing ping pong and stuff like that. Great environment, and it sounds like you're getting the right people, present company included. So one question I had, I guess, is that you've mentioned sort of some of the areas in which people are using your software, other drone makers, sometimes movie makers. What kind of verticals are you seeing as being the most popular ones for using drones? Here we go. See that users can say hi to the 3D robotics people. Very nice.
Yeah.
Thank you. Chris is giving us a tour right now. Jonathan's giving us a tour.
So you're asking what other areas would be using drones? I mean, there's a lot. I mean, every day you hear stories about people using drones for good, whether it's dropping off supplies to flood areas or using it to survey things. And essentially, we are most interested in being the company that can build the foundation for whatever that is going to hold, whether it's surveying farms for crops or creating video content that explores or communicates things, and anything in between. I mean, there's crazy inventions and uses like putting an infrared camera on it to check for gas leaks or inspecting power lines, all the way to all kinds of crazy uses. So the fact that we are owning the space as much as possible, where whatever the future holds for drones, whether it's Amazon delivery or anything in between, that will be built on our software and flight code and things like that. So that's kind of the long game. In terms of areas where that's happening now, basically the Solo, 3DR Solo, which is the drone that we released this year and is now in Best Buy, B&H, that's our main consumer product that we're pushing. And the cool thing about that is we've used computers because we've partnered with, or been backed by companies like Qualcomm that makes, the chips in your cell phone. So we can add more processors. We can put computers in the drone and the controller and do things that no other drone can do, like set keyframes in space and do curves that interpolate and use logarithms to ease in and out of those curves. And you can play a flight path like you would an iTunes song with a pause button and a rewind button and things like that. So taking the piloting out of it and basically saying, if you want to create content, you can use this as a tool. Similar to how 10 years ago there weren't a lot of people who were photographers, but if you put a camera on a phone and create a platform to share that with your friends, now everybody's posting, hundreds of photos a day, a week, whatever it is, because you made those tools accessible, taken the curve out, and put them in the hands of people that have a platform to use them on. So we're looking to do that with drones, and so far the results have been pretty amazing and lots of fun to participate in.
Speaking of the results, recently you spent some time in Malta. Can you go into a little bit of what you did there?
I can a little bit. Actually, the first half of our time, the days in Malta, we put out a video for 3DR. Basically, me and two other guys from 3DR rented ATVs and drove all around, just like bats out of hell, and filmed a bunch of amazing landscape stuff. And then the main reason we went there was Michael Bay was filming a movie called 13 Hours, which is about Benghazi, and through some connections, we were asked to, show him solo and basically how it works on a film set, and had various levels of involvement, showing him that and participating. That I can't go into too much detail. When the movie gets closer to coming out, we will have some pretty interesting video content that I think people will really like and be surprised at. But I guess the takeaway would be knowing that the same product you get off the shelf at Best Buy can have a place on a multi-million-dollar film set and hold its own and do things that nothing else can is really, really exciting, and that's kind of the big takeaway. But yeah, it was awesome. We got to meet Michael Bay and show him how to fly, and he had us participate various levels. So that was a great trip. We went to Hawaii for 10 days to film the launch materials for Solo. I just got back from Mexico City, where we're getting up with a bunch of our producers who live in Mexico and attaching Solos to surfboards and putting them in trash bags and swimming through sea caves to get to hidden beaches so we can film them at sunrise, and all kinds of just super fun adventure stuff. And that's one of the more exciting things about working for a drone company is you can't film ugly stuff. So we're always traveling to really great looking places and having adventures, because that's what who wouldn't want to do that with drones? That's why you would get a drone and what you'd like to do with it. So yeah, lots of adventures. Much more to come.
So 2 questions, Jonathan. Are you hiring? No, I'm joking. I'm happily employed, but it sounds wonderful. And
we are hiring. I think I've been with 3DR only about 7-8 months now, and they've hired about 200 people since I've started. So the company's doubled in size in much less than a year. So especially if you're a developer or engineer, and you have any kind of specialty, whether it's in user experience or software design, yes, we are always looking for talented people.
All right, perfect. Listeners, you heard it. You know how to be creative and get in contact with 3DR and show your passion and your skills for it. So second question, kind of before we wrap up, and we'll definitely want to get some information sort of on where people can find you as well. But really kind of a broader level question is, how do you think technology projects can kind of use some of these principles of motion design and some of these really cool technologies, things like drones and drone filming, to more effectively reach people? One of the things we see a lot is decentralized technology projects. They're really, really cool technologies, but they have a hard time actually getting users because they're just kind of stuck away in some corner of the internet. How do you see, as a motion designer, how projects like maybe Augur or BitPay or whoever else you've worked with can get better exposure?
I think by using the very medium alone, you've already automatically widened your user base, and because every field is more connected, whether it's the world of decentralization or people who care about Blockcoin, like for instance with the Augur video, using somebody like Shearer Jennings and using animated infographics to tell it, all of a sudden that matters to people who are in the infographics community, which might sound like a small community, but there's a lot of us, and also people who are interested in country music, and that's the kind of thing where I think the internet is the whole clickbait formula is very centered on 2 to 3 overlapping things. Like if it's an article like, why is country legend Shooter Jennings talking about decentralized, market prediction? That's okay, I'm somewhat interested in why that might be happening. Whereas if you only use your traditional channels, you're talking to your audience. You're only talking to, the audience that you have built in. And the other way to increase that audience would just be through effective marketing. The fact that we have all the data that we can garnish at our fingertips from every device that everyone's using, from your laptop to your phone that's with you at all the time. We know your location. We know everything you look at. Not me personally, but I'm saying all that data is available, and we're finally learning what to do with it. Like a few years ago, you had the rise of analytics companies where all of a sudden, especially paired with the recession, when these giant budgets started getting slashed, analytics companies could tell you exactly where your money was going, how effective it was in terms of how it comes back to you, return on investment, all that sort of thing. And then I felt like the pendulum kind of swung the other way. It's like you know all that with analytics. You can make decisions with analytics, but without the creative aspect, you're just getting data, and you're becoming like 1984. And the fact is, you need both of those to work together. So using creative storytelling like motion graphics, which kind of encompasses anything that moves that you would want to communicate to somebody, along with data to tell you who you're actually talking to, that's a pretty deadly marketing combination in terms of finding the people and getting them a message that they care about, and it informs your decision. Like some of this stuff when I started researching, Ethereum and the blockchain, there was a lot of people who lived and breathed that stuff, talking to people who are also fascinated by it, and they were using concepts that quickly, I felt lost in about 30 seconds. So in the projects I did for Tony, knowing that I need to communicate this in a way that anybody could watch it for like a minute, 2 minutes, and not feel lost and feel included and feel like, wow, this complicated concept is actually pretty easy. And that's happening in motion design. It's also happening in graphic design. Like Tony posted a great infographic the other day, which was explaining how Ether worked or Ethereum worked in like a simple way. And whenever you see those things, they seem so obvious. Like, well, of course that makes sense. But that takes a skilled designer who understands the concept, understands communication, and has the tools to distill that concept into something that feels so digestible. So having that tool set, knowing who you're talking to, knowing the story that you're telling, that's how you use design or motion design or any kind of design to have communication that's entertaining, effective, informative, and that people will watch outside of the circle that you're in.
Awesome. Thank you so much for doing the show, man. I really appreciate it. And we also wanted to give you a chance to plug your Twitter, plug 3D Robotics, the website where people can learn about your projects and everything about you and what you're doing.
Yeah, 3drobotics.com is where you can find Solo and any 3D Robotics projects. I'm not super active on Twitter. My website is jbcmotion.com, or if you just Google JBC Motion, a lot of my content's on Vimeo and things like that. I'm extremely busy, but occasionally I do take on additional products if they're for rad people like Tony doing super rad things. But yeah, I'm around. Thanks for having me. Pleasure.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on, and have a good one.
You too.